Hello, you beautiful people out there, and welcome to the Banner Gaming's talk on the future of raid difficulties and rewards in Legion. This will be based on Warlord's current personal accountability as well as a normal mode mechanic removal and some other factors. My name is Kimo.
And I am Wisdom.
Now, the question on everybody's mind is, what is raiding going to be like in Legion? And today we're talking about more of the raid difficulties and rewards. We've seen a lot of changes in Warlords of Draenor, and we're going to discuss those changes. Most of you already know the details, so we're going to keep the details of the changes to a minimum, but we're really going to discuss how that we think that is going to affect the Legion rating and the expectation for each setting.
Now, I personally think that we are going in a pretty good direction with the way that rating is being set up. What we've seen in Warlords is a big transition towards personal accountability, more so than in any other expansion. And this has led to some fairly challenging rating encounters. I mean, you may think back through your rose tinted glasses on other fights that are just brutally difficult. And I'm not saying that they aren't out there. I mean, this is coming from an ahead of the curve perspective. But it doesn't change the fact that making sure that everybody's on point is more challenging than making sure just 2 or 3 or 5 people out of 10 or 25 are doing what they're supposed to be.
Let's go over before anything, let's go over the normal mode gutted parts and the what is heroic going to look like parts, because personal accountability has been changed due to the gutting of normal mode. So right now, for those who don't know, normal mode has, instead of a nerf, a blanket nerf, they've taken a lot of the one-shot mechanics out. So it seems.
So some of the most noteworthy changes that we've seen are mainly surrounding Zolarak, right? This is a fight where mixing the different colors of fire is extremely problematic, and it will just one-shot large portions of your raid, especially later on in the fight. We've seen a really pretty dramatic change that interacts with personal accountability in an interesting way. There are ads all throughout that fight. I mean, anyone who's done it before is familiar with this on really any difficulty. And making sure that you aren't hit by those ads or that you don't allow the imps that spawn throughout the fight to get cast off is extremely important because it means that you spawn more fire in places you can't control. So by having people not be punished for standing in things they shouldn't be and not doing their job to switch to the targets they're supposed to be, it's encouraging poor play, and it's making it so that it's not as complicated to manage the really intricate mechanics that the fight is built upon. And these kinds of changes are rampant throughout any fight in Hellfire Citadel that has a one-shot mechanic. There are more examples, but
Well, let me stop you there. Now, you say it encourages poor play. I personally don't think it encourages poor play. I think it empowers, friends and family guilds to be able to stick together and play together. Yes, pretty much all of the changes were made so that nothing can really one shot you. And we can go on for examples to the end of time, but I just feel like they are taking normal and they are making it friends and family worthy, and they're taking heroic and making it you need to be on your game even if you have gear. For example, Archimond, if you don't kill the shadows that come out of the nether, the green portal ball things, whatever the hell they're called, don't care, they will make you not be able to heal your teammates and you will die in heroic. That should not be a mechanic that's in normal, and it's not. It's no longer a mechanic in normal. I really like where they're going with this, and I think that it'll be beneficial. But as far as heroic goes, we have to be on our toes almost every fight. Even with gear, there are things that can kill us. You don't pass the ball on Iskar, you die. You don't kill Shadow Fiends, you die. You mix colors, you die. There's only so much you can get away with, even though it's a farm content boss. And I feel like sometimes the raiders, and me included, like a nice, easy plow night. And we just go through and we plow things. And, that's what a farm night is, a more relaxed environment. And keeping the personal accountability that high on every fight, I like the personal accountability. I don't like that. And not only that, the one downside to having normal mode be more friends and family, although I do agree with it, it makes our heroic runs a little harder, because assuming that it's going to be the model moving forward, we're going to be doing fights without certain mechanics in normal. So like normal was more of our practice zone where we could get hit by mechanics, not die, and still collect loot and bought, loot. But now that is no longer our practice.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. From where I'm coming from here, as a raid leader of a heroic level guild, I bank on normal to be the training zone, right? We run through and I teach everybody the mechanics that they will need to know for a heroic encounter. I don't want to have to go through and teach people to fight on normal once and then blow through it and then have people just flip it over to heroic and walk inside and say, well, this is what we did before. That doesn't work anymore. Now, please unlearn everything we've been doing for the last month. We have to do these fights dramatically differently in reaction to these tougher mechanics. I don't like that it can't be used as basically just a set of training wheels. Now, in a bigger picture, I understand that more of the community works on a friends and family level, and that's going to be more popular. I mean, that's really what the guild I came from looked like. They were much more friends and family oriented, and so the expectations for skill and gear and playstyle, all those kinds of things, not nearly as strict as we hold them in our guild. And so I think it makes sense for those groups of people. They have a place to play now, and that works well for them. One of the things I am a little bit concerned about, especially as we get into Legion, is seeing how these people feel about the big kind of shifts that are on the horizon for the way that non-gear rewards are being dealt with, right? And in this, I'm talking about everything that doesn't relate to what you slap on your character, right? So this is not the eye level difference. It's not stat differences or being able to burn through fights faster or anything like that. This is talking about things like Moose Mount. This is stuff like the Korkron Warwolf that we saw before. These are the cosmetic rewards that you have the potential to get, those kinds of things. I'm curious how the level of differentiation that we're seeing is going to come into play because it looks like in trying to put a mechanical gap between normal and heroic, the sensible thing to do here, just like they did for mythic and everything under it, is put in a kind of reward difference. And we see a lot of players, especially with Moose Mount just coming out now, who want that reward but don't play the level to obtain it. So, I'm curious what sort of a community pushback we're going to see because it is a little bit concerning. And when we look at how artifacts are going to be impacted, I can't imagine not having artifacts in heroic be upgraded more quickly, or at the very least be more potent because you're rating consistently at a heroic level rather than a normal one. I mean, if you look at the weapons that we get now, I think Kimo made a great point earlier, saying that when you raid heroic, you get better gear and better weapons, and if the artifacts don't power up in conjunction with that, it's just not going to make sense. It's not going to feel like you are a better player.
And as far as cosmetic rewards go, I feel like Blizzard unofficially gave their comments about what they feel is a good level of difficulty to earn something special. They put the Moose Mount in. They could have done it for normal. They didn't. They did it for heroic. Now, being a heroic raider, I still respect that mythic raiders should get something special because they put in their skill, their time, their commitment is more than I put in as a heroic raider. So I'm not trying to be, oh, I'm a heroic raider, I deserve the Moose Mount. No. But Blizzard is essentially saying that that is what their threshold is looking to be like for something a little extra special. So whether it's a little something extra special for heroic, then a little extra something special for mythic, which is very well the case and very well should be the case because the mythic raider should be rewarded. Them putting in the Moose Mount at a heroic level tells me, hey, this is what we think will be an acceptable level of difficulty to get something special like a mount or what could possibly be a new variance of your weapon in Legion or anything like that.
Yeah, and we've seen, and we talked about this more in an earlier video. So if you want to hear more, go and look for that. But we talked about sort of this developing trend with giving away mounts and things like that at the end of an expansion on a heroic level kill. And I'm curious if we won't see more of that stretched through more of Legion, right? We are going to have similar raid tiers, it sounds like, to what we were dealing with in Warlords, and so I'm curious if maybe, when you finish Heimel or Blackrock or their equivalents in Legion, you won't get something special because you did it on Heroic, besides just your, checking a box of an achievement or getting a title or something like that. I wonder if there won't be a genuine distinction. Like, here is a relic that only drops in Heroic or something like that, or here is, like a cosmetic. because that does seem to be the route that they're taking in Legion, is pushing towards cosmetic things. And if those cosmetic rewards are good enough, I am curious to see how people who can't raid heroic or choose not to voluntarily feel when they are denied a reward that's only available for a limited time.
And to one extent, I don't feel like it's going to make it's not changing the game. You know, the higher level you raid, the more rewards you get. And I don't feel like none of this is going to be new or game changing, with the exception of the rewards could be based around your artifact weapon, which is something that you are putting effort into the entire expansion. So it's not like one mount or a different color of a set of gear or something. Like, this is something you're putting your entire effort into. So if they decide not to do a mount for heroic level rating, but decide to do something else, people might be a little bit more upset just because they focus the entire expansion on their weapon. But that being said, I really, as long as normal mode, they should keep their set bonuses. And the only difference for normal mode and heroic mode, in my opinion, from a gear perspective, is the item level. I don't think that there should be like take away any kind of set bonus or anything like that, because you're still putting together a group and you still want to feel the rewards of putting, the efforts of putting together a group and doing something hard. But I'm going to be interesting to see what they do for bonuses for heroic players now that they are kind of setting a gap and distinct lines. Normal heroic is no longer just a harder tuned normal mode. It's more mechanics.
Yeah. And to some extent, when we're talking about more mechanics, I think it brings up kind of an interesting question. And I recognize that this is largely personal preference, what you want to get involved in. But I think that it is interesting, especially from a raid leader's perspective, to work with really having to have everybody on point. We will wipe or at least take a tremendous amount of damage if people don't do what they're supposed to, especially when you're learning to fight for progression. We see this in Hellfire Citadel on Kilrog. If you don't get into the eye portals, right, that's one person's mistake punishing everybody else. As a tank, as someone who has tanked all of Hellfire Citadel, if you screw up as the robot on Socrathar, right, if you are in the construct and you don't know what you're doing, you will wipe everybody in there, right? Even if it's on accident, it certainly not because I've ever done it, but periodically I have heard rumors of people making mistakes on that fight, and it is not ideal. It does not lead to the loot chest at the end. But we also see things like making the Nether portals and having the boss heal on Archimon, and Zolorak, like I talked about already. Um, how you deal with people who aren't measuring up to the personal responsibility that a fight demands of them, and then simultaneously being able to maintain a rotation. I mean, that can be complicated for some people, and that is something that we're going to talk about more in a separate series altogether, actually. So look for Best in Slot to be coming out. That's where we're going to be talking about these kinds of things. But, it's still, I'm curious for the people who, aren't exactly on board with all of these changes. Where will you end up shaking out? Can you handle the personal responsibility, or do you want something that's a little bit more simple? And depending on where you fall there, what are the rewards going to look like for the people who step it up and the people who step down?
Yeah, it's actually a really good point. I know a couple people who know the rotation back to front, and they are amazing at, like, if I said, "Hey, what's your priorities? What would you do in this situation? Would you do this?" They would know everything. But to actually do it while doing all of the mechanics in every single fight on such a personal level is hard. Think about Gary, right? Okay, you had one person kill the ball guy or two people kill the ball guy, whatever, and you could kind of stand there DPS and you worry about the mind control, but if you kept focusing the boss, somebody else, would get the mind control. Whereas if you need to step into a portal and you don't, your whole group wipes. Like, that kind of thing just it puts a lot of pressure on people who aren't good at multitasking, where they might have been heroic before, but they're not heroic anymore. I think there needs to be a fine line between keeping the fights consistently interesting, which they did a wonderful job with, but not having every fight have personal accountability wipes. So yeah, maybe you'll wipe yourself if you don't pay attention to something, but to wipe your whole group on almost every fight, having that option kind of kind of stinks because even heroic raiders, we need time where we can kind of BS on vent and make jokes, and we play games during like old raid fights, and we need that relaxation chill time to not only to bond as a guild and enjoy playing with each other, but to have that break from the face walling of whatever progression boss we're on. So Blizzard, my advice, keep the fights interesting like you have been, but don't make every fight a do or die for everybody. If somebody messes up, let them die. Don't make them punish the whole group, because then also makes them feel bad too. You know,
I would really like to see a point where you don't have to put in the same amount of effort on farm content. And I don't know exactly how this would be handled effectively, but there is something pretty tiring about coming back to a boss like Zolarak. I mean, he has been a problem for our guild in the past. And feeling like I don't know if despite having killed this 10 or 15 times, we're going to get it tonight because we've made silly mistakes on other fights that may be compromising on this one. Having a boss that's been on farm for weeks and weeks still be daunting sometimes seems like it's bad design because there comes a point where you don't want to have to be super on top of your game. You do want that chance to step back a little bit. And so I'm curious, if maybe we're not going to see a point where you can afford to scale it back a little bit, or you can structure your raid group or have people play in a certain way that you delegate a lot of personal responsibility onto a handful of people, and you don't have every single person have something happen to them that may wipe the entire group.
and I can understand that for a mythic, but our guild too, we try to foster new members. So we'll bring in new people to farm content who either don't have the skill or the gear. And it's really frustrating on a fight like Iskar where you're practicing with your core group, everybody gets it down. And then if you bring in two new people on a farm night and they get the ball and they don't react well, or it's their first time through, so they're generally they should have an idea, but people freak out. Suddenly you have three, four, or five people off the edge because one person made a mistake. Where if that one person stands, you know, it just not only is it hard to foster new people, it's hard to plan raid nights. Like we like to plan out what we're going to do each night, and if we're not 100% confident we're going to get this farm boss right away because we're bringing new people, or for whatever the reason may be, it can also throw us off for what we want to accomplish for the week. The last thing we wanted to talk about is they're introducing a buff that you get once a week, and every buff seems to be a little different. But if on any mode of difficulty you're stuck on a boss, you can use the guild wide or raid wide buff to either do like 10% more damage, 10% more healing to a certain boss for the week. And I think this brings a new dynamic, helping guilds get past that wall and that frustration. You know, being coming from a background of I've been playing since vanilla, having my guild fall apart on Valstress, the Corrupt, it was a really horrible feeling to be stuck on something for months and months and you just couldn't pass it. I think that's the name of it anyway. It was the second boss in BWL. But regardless, I think it adds a great dynamic. You can only use it once a week, and I think it'll save a lot of guild fighting and headache.
Yeah, I think it's really going to be pretty much entirely dependent on how it changes the encounter, because we actually don't know what it's going to do, right? We don't know if it'll just be 10% more healing or 10% more damage or something like that. As it may remove an entire mechanic from the fight, or it may buff you to the point where it trivializes some of the mechanics that are in a fight. And depending on how it changes every encounter, it may be dramatically more potent on one boss than another. So I think that, at least for me, the jury's still out, until we see how this impacts each single boss independently of any other one. It, we won't really know how big of a deal it will be. So I think it is nice that they're offering something to get you through that wall, but I am a little bit concerned, at least as a raid leader, to be pressured by the guild at large to, like as soon as you run into a wall, have your knee jerk reaction be, oh, well, let's use our weekly buff. If I don't think it's a particularly hard fight and or I can point to people really fucking up mechanics. How do you get people to learn those fights that actually aren't that hard and to just do it right when you have the opportunity to use this thing that makes the fight easier in some meaningful way, you know?
And that brings up a great point in my head too of helping raiders be better. If every time the guild, screws up a mechanic and multiple people do it, and you use this arbitrary buff to get through it, well, are your raiders really getting better? You know what I mean? Eventually, yeah, you will use the buff on another boss, but that's because you have more gear. It might detract from people learning fights and becoming better overall.
Yeah, and so that's a part of what I'm concerned about. I think there are some points that, we can recognize as a guild where we've seen, if we could just do 10% more damage, the boss would have died 50 pulls ago. But, I those are few and far between, and I'm hesitant to say that something we can apply every single week is going to be in every raider's best interest.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you can have 10% more damage, but if you don't stand in the 3 Kilrog circles, he's going to heal. So I feel like you do have to. I feel like it will still make you learn the mechanics now that I'm talking it out, but it'll just make you hold that level of concentration and focus for less. At least if they follow the same mechanic rules that, Warlords has followed. Because there'll still be one-shot things if you mess up. You still have to pass the eye in Iskar if you have 10% more damage. You just have to pass it maybe one less phase, a little bit less concentration uh, on really long fights. Think about Imperiator Morgok, how long that fight is. It's like 15 minutes, forever to get to the end phase. Well, a 10% damage buff would give you more time to actually learn the end phase. Those kind of things, I would not like it if they took out mechanics with these buffs. I think it just should be a flat damage buff or whatever. Just say, I don't have to focus as long. Because on long farm night or long boss nights where you're hitting your head, focus can be an issue. You've seen that reverse progress syndrome where we have better attempts the first hour and the second hour where we have twice as worse attempts as our first hour.
Yeah, it goes back and forth.
But, this is our opinions on the future of rating difficulties. We hope you liked the video. If you do, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like the art, please check out our wonderful artist link page below. This has been Kimo.
And I've been Wisdom. A few questions for you to answer down in the comments below. Do you feel like the pressure of personal responsibility is ever an issue in rating to you? Are you one of those people who maybe gets intimidated by the prospect of too much personal responsibility? Do you really like the separation of normal and heroic? Let us know your thoughts, please, down below. Thank you all, and have a good night.
Bye-bye.